as a topic can not only be tackled for what it is, but tackled because today the data analytics tools are so much better than before, right? So obviously the fraudsters are getting really good at what they're doing, but so are we getting really good at catching them, right? And every fraudster leaves some footprints behind, and it is our job to kind of find the footprints, right? So again, a lot of discussion today will be a very practical session headed by Zahir and his team. Soumya would be talking about data analytics. You have Paul, who also is from our tech side of the business, and Roger and Joseph, who really specialize in this field I keep in my pocket every day of my life, and I really, without which I would be lost. So data analytics is not only a cure, but it is also a preventive mechanism. And I think I would suppose that you would speak about both it as embedding it as a preventive mechanism, as well as then, in case, God forbid, something was to happen, then really discovering what actually went wrong. There is obviously a great need, as you rightly put it, in Africa and generally in the world. There's so much going on out there. And what does it mean for us as industry leaders, as people or captains of industry, people who are like-minded, who want the very best for our economy and the businesses that run within this economy, that we have to prevent the scourge of fraud, right? And we have to maximize the benefits of data, AI, ML, and anything else that comes with data as well. So I think it's a two streams, but possibly getting welded together. So thank you very much for coming, and I now pass you on to the panel. Zahir, on to you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Damito. If I can just ask the panelists to please take their seats. Roger, Joseph, Soumya, Paul. So as they do that, how many of us are following the recent events on LLMs? Huh? Oh, okay, so you're speaking first? Yes. Right, okay. So let me introduce you to Soumya, okay, who's going to give a keynote address, okay, and then we'll have the panel session after that. Yeah. Soumya?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you all. Before I start on data analytics and give you a broader perspective about it, I'd like to understand what you all think about data analytics, or how do you think it's going to transform your organization? So maybe if I can pass the mic around, 2-3 people, because if they can tell me what they perceive data analytics as, or digital transformation as.
I think at the chamber, data analytics is extremely important to automate some of our processes, improve efficiency, help us foresee trends and act upon these trends, and act ahead of things instead of reacting to things once they happen, I think.
Anybody else? Anything else to add to that?
Well, in terms of marketing and communications, well, data analytics is what drives the shaping of your product. So a product that's engineered in your head or within your team is not necessarily going to resonate with your target audiences. Now, data is what drives the kind of product and the content that you will put forward. It's absolutely essential, and I would say it's the first step in our work.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you guys have that perspective. It makes my job easier in the presentation. I know today's focus is largely about fraud analytics and how data and business transformation does help in fraud detection and prevention. But before that, I just wanted to set a note on data analytics on a whole, right? And change your perspective about it. But I see you already have a good perspective about it. So I'll just walk you through a couple of slides. We'll first start with statistics. I did a little bit of research for this, right? And according to data, we have about 600,000 plus formal businesses that could actually benefit from data analytics. And this specifically is categorized for SMEs, right? And less than 7% use digital devices for businesses. So you have less than 7% of SMEs that are using digital devices. That could be a fully automated ERP, that could be a barcode scanner. Just the other day, we were dealing with a client who does not have a barcode scanner to get their products out. So small things, right? And then, and for the SMEs that have actually adopted analytics and digital transformation, they've seen a higher productivity of 2.8%, 2.8 times higher productivity in their day-to-day businesses, right? And this is about Africa on a whole. If you see Kenya as a snapshot, we have 31% specialized softwares. While we're not the best at technology in the world, we have a couple of systems and tools that are specialized for the Kenyan economy. They're growing, they're really growing, and we also have tools from outside that are coming in, trying to specialize within our economy to help the digital transformation, right? In all of the SMEs that we have in Kenya, only 21% are using an ERP, which means that the rest are yet sitting on Excel. And if it's on Excel, that means you have no trail, you have no audit. Anything can be changed at any time, and there's no accountability, basically. And the 5% intensive users, that means people have already implemented digitization or digital tools, but there's only 5% usage end-to-end, right? So they do have an ERP, but then they're only using 5% of its capability, because of which now there are gaps, the loopholes are exploited, and then fraud happens on that. And 3.1% intensive ERP, which means that 3.1% again of the SMEs are using the ERP end-to-end. So it's just a 3.1% that is actually using it for its full capability. So what does this mean in terms of analytics, right? Or what should SMEs do? Like you all mentioned when we started, like Sandeep had mentioned, Dimitri had mentioned in their opening remarks, data analytics is not only about seeing what has happened in the past, right? But it's also about trying to predict what's going to happen, see the patterns, and kind of try and prevent it before it happens itself. So it's not only reactive, right? And it helps you in 3 ways. One is sharper decisions, and we always believe that anything that needs to change in an organization needs to start at the leadership level. Otherwise, it's not going to work out. So when the leadership says that, no, I want to see this report from this tool, or no, we have to do the analytics, and this is how I want to see it. I want to monitor this on a daily basis, and it kind of forces everybody under to follow analytics and to be able to maintain clean data. That creates a whole life cycle. Because you want to see the reports, you need to pull it out from the system. Because you need to pull it out from the system, you need to maintain it in the system. And just not maintain it for the sake of maintaining it, but then actually input right data, because garbage in, garbage out. If you don't input the right data, you never get out a proper analytics out of it. Also, we have better performance. We use analytics, like Sandeep had mentioned, to monitor everything in our business. That is people's timesheet, to see how they're spending time, to see how our clients are performing, to rate our star performers, end to end, right? And that's the same case for SMEs. And actually, it's more valid for SMEs because it reduces cost in terms of manpower. Things that people are sitting and analyzing, they can probably do something else better, and then you can push that workload onto analytics itself. And then there's also stronger resilience, because now when you're sitting on the board and you're taking decisions, then you have enough proof to kind of fall back to what you already have and take decisions based on that. So you're taking decision based on proof, you're taking decision based on the data that you already have, rather than taking it just based out of assumptions, right? Please feel free to stop me in case any of you have any questions. So how does analytics actually drive transformation in an organization, right? The first is to capture the most important point, right? You have an ERP, that's fine, but if you don't use the ERP, then there's no point, right? If you do not capture the details in the ERP, then there's no point. You have an HR system. you don't capture your employee details correctly, then there's no point, right? So the first is to capture, whether it's sales, whether it's operational, whether it's customer details, whether it's risk data, whether it's employee data, you need to capture it in the systems that you have. And in case you do not have a system, now this is the first point where you identify the gaps that you have and say that this is what needs to be implemented. The second is to integrate. I always believe that every set of data should have a single source of truth. So if it's customer data, your single source of truth should be the CRM. Anything to do with like the customer address, their PIN numbers, their finance card, the contacts, everything needs to come from the CRM. Anything to do with probably products, the single source of truth should be ERP, right? And then when that flows into the other systems like customer details flowing into the ERP, it should just be a sync and not a replication, right? The third thing is now analyze. Now that's where data analytics comes into part, right? It's pulling data from various sources that you have and trying to bring out meaningful insights. Trying to bring out KPIs, key performance indicators that your organization wants to monitor, right? On what makes a difference to your organization. What are the 5 key points that you want to monitor on a daily basis, right? Or a weekly basis. And then is decide. Now, based on the analysis that you have, what is that decision that you need to make? Do you need to hire more people? Do you need to introduce a new product? Do you need to retire a product? All of these decisions can be made out of the analysis that you do. And then last is scale. I believe that you start small, start with the data that you have, and then you scale on top of it. There is no need to go full-fledged AI and try and do everything that we have in the world at the moment. You start small, create a small pack, and then start building on top of it. And that's what the scale talks about. So I brought out 3 points, right, on how you can see a playbook for SMEs. One is to know your customer, right? That's how you can use analytics, because there's a lot of details that you can fetch out from the systems that you have. The SMEs do have the data, it's just that they're not bringing it out and they're not visualizing it in a way that they need to see it, right? And then also run tight operations. Like I said, you have an ERP, but then it has many loopholes. When you start analyzing the data, you realize where your loopholes are. It could be something as simple as in the amount field, it allows you to put any number of characters, or it allows you to put special characters, right? So when you analyze that data, then when you try to sum the amount, then you're obviously not going to get the correct amount, right? Because you have special characters in it. Now that falls back, and then you say that, okay, I need to change something in my ERP. So don't only use it as to see what your revenues are or what your customers look like, but also to make your operations better. And then it's also to strengthen controls early. This especially is true for fraud detection, to detect any anomalies. You can also go to the extent of detecting your logs that you have, right? In terms of the SOC operations and all of that. If somebody would ask me, what are the 4 use cases that I'd want to prioritize, especially when I'm getting into an SME, these are the 4 use cases that I would say. The first is customer and sales analytics. Of course, trying to see what the customers look like, what the sales look like, what are the products, what are the trends like for the sales, and all of that. Cash flow and working capital monitoring, everything to do with the ERP, tracking the receivables, tracking the creditors, tracking the debtors, all of that stuff. Your balance sheets, making sure that they're clean, trial balances, making sure that those are clean. And then operations and inventory optimization. For the number of customers that we've worked, and whenever we've done analytics, especially for SMEs, what we've realized is that a lot of people don't focus on the operations and inventory in terms of the data that they have in the ERP. And there are a lot of loopholes, and only when we enter and get their data is when they realize that there are a lot of gaps, right? But this is something that can be managed very easily with digital transformation and with analytics both. And of course, the last, which is the topic for the day, which is why I put it last, is risk, fraud, and exception monitoring. We are doing a couple of dashboards where we're doing our daily internal audit. So they don't need to wait for like a 3-month or 6-month cycle to do internal audit. We created dashboards for SMEs where now they can just monitor on how the data looks on a daily basis, on how their operations look on a daily basis. So it's more real time than waiting for something to happen and then you take a measure on that, right? With that, I'd just like to leave you with 3 takeaways. I feel like analytics it increases the capability of the business. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have, especially when you want to take right decision based on evidence, right? And like I'd mentioned, you don't need to invest heavily in analytics or digital transformation. We can take it slow, and I think this is where most of the people have kind of taken a step back, right? Because they say that there's a lot of heavy investment involved, either in AI, either in analytics, or either in the tools that's there. But I feel like we can start slow. We can start with whatever we have at the moment, and then build on top of it, okay? And the third one is growth and protection. Like Sandeep mentioned in his opening speech, we are growing, and analytics is one of the tools that's really helping us gain visibility in the 11 countries that we're in. So we sit centrally over here and monitor what's happening in those 11 countries. And I think if that's possible for us, it's possible for anyone, irrespective of the size and scale that you're in. With that, I end my presentation. Maybe we can just take 2 minutes, and probably you can scan this. Oh. Okay, we'll go to that page at the end, and I think we can start the panel now. Zahir.
Thank you, Samia. And thanks again, Domito and Sandeep, and a very good morning to all of you. We're going to go straight to the panel session now. If you can just come there, Roger. So, has everybody heard about, or anybody heard about Claude Mythos? Yeah? Anybody? So, but everybody's heard about Claude and probably using it as well, right? So a couple of weeks ago, okay, documents were leaked. They didn't want it, but documents were leaked. Claude put them on a public portal that everybody could access. And suddenly there was a huge thing in the internet because what they'd leaked was like massive and game-changing to the whole world. They'd leaked that they had a new LLM called Mythos. It was so powerful, they were testing it, it was so powerful that it had discovered bugs in the most secure systems, okay, from the time we've had internet, that have not been discovered for the last 25, 30 years. Okay, and it was so bad that if they'd released it, okay, the hackers would have had a field day because they could have broken into any security system designed by man. So they withheld it, and instead what they did was they then offered it to all of the big players, to Microsoft and everybody else who's got anything to do with digitization, and said, guys, fix your stuff. All the banks, okay, and everybody else. They said, fix your stuff, guys, because at some point this is going to come out. And then what they did after that was, if you know their leading model until 3-4 days ago, was Opus 4.6, right? They've now released Opus 4.7, but they've dumbed it down. Okay, if you look at the benchmarking, okay, it scores very well everywhere except with agentic AI, because they don't want people. They've actually dumbed it down because they don't want people to use it to hack. So it's coming, whether we like it or not. Okay, you know, we're going to have more and more problems, not less and less problems. You know, if you are not smart and you're not protecting yourself, you know, and you haven't covered all your fences, then obviously, you know, this is going to become a big problem for your business. And in particular, SMEs. You know, we talk about SMEs. SMEs are the lifeblood of this economy, and not just this economy, but I think most economies, because it's families that run businesses, small businesses, medium-term businesses, and they're the ones, you know, that are the most exposed. Yeah, they're exposed because, first of all, they have few people. Okay, there's the culture of trust, you know, because they're family-owned businesses, so everybody's very close. They trust each other, but also there's been a big digital leap now with eTIMS. If you don't know, KRA, okay, has more vision of your data and more transparency of your data than your own team and yourself, yeah, if you are not digitized. So you need to be digitized, otherwise KRA knows more about your business than you do yourself. So don't be surprised when they walk in and say, hey, you know, what's been happening here? You know, you haven't really told us, you know, the whole story, yeah? And then obviously, SMEs don't have the luxury of resources. You know, they're always, you know, hand to mouth, okay? And they don't have the bucks to throw on big systems, you know, as Soumya's just said. So this is key, and that's why it's really key that, you know, we're talking about what we're talking today. So let me quickly introduce my panel for today. We've got Roger Mohia. Roger is our manager in forensics. He spends all of his time sniffing blood. That's what he does. So he's a blood sniffer. He's our bloodhound. Yeah. And then we've got Soumya. Soumya has already introduced herself. She's the one that does magic. Okay, Sandeep said to her, you know, one of the reasons why we've grown, by the way, nearly 40% in dollar terms for the last couple of years. I think that's the fastest growth rate of any advisory firm. And one of the key things, obviously Sandeep's leadership, Sandeep not taking that away from you, but one of the key things is, you know, we've got access to all of what's happening to our business at our fingertips, everything. And therefore, we can react quickly. Okay, and that's the big unfair advantage that we've had over our competitors. And then the next thing is Joseph. Joseph is our guru on internal audit. So he basically manages a lot of SMEs and he sorts out their governance structures. He's regularly reporting to audit committees, to boards and so on and so forth, helping them with their risk management, with internal audit, with governance. He does lots of training. All of these guys, by the way, they do lots of training. So they'd be very happy to walk into any of your organizations and help you out. And then there's Paul Macharia. Paul Macharia is our IT expert. And he basically does all of the stuff, you know, that we don't want to do. So I'm going to start straight with the panel questions. And let me just say a word about myself. So I'm Zahir. Yeah, I didn't get properly introduced. I'm the partner for advisory services, responsible for the region. I've been in practice for 40 years. So when you add all their experiences together, it's that plus a little bit more. I started the first forensic practice in East and Central Africa in the Moi days, nearly 30 years ago. At that time, I was a partner with KPMG, and everybody thought I was mad. They said, Zahir, you're not just going to get yourself killed, you're going to get all of us killed, because why the hell do you want to fight fraud, when nobody is even allowed to print the word in the newspaper? But there you go. I'm still alive, and my team's still here. We've had some close shaves, but it's good. It's been a good fight. I also started the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners Kenya chapter. So I'm the one that established it. I was its first president, and it's a thriving body today. So forensics is well and alive in Kenya. You can see some of the players here. Please do speak with them. And one message for the people online is if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. Okay, straight to the question and answer session. So, Roger, fraud and financial irregularities remain a major pain point for Kenyan businesses, especially SMEs, who have limited resources. From a forensic perspective, what practical strategies can teams use to detect, investigate, and prevent fraud in real time whilst balancing cost and effectiveness?
Thank you, Zahir, for that question. I think to start, most of us know in terms of our businesses, SMEs and whatnot, we normally catch fraud many times by mistake, many times it's by a whistleblower. So someone comes on and says that this is what has been happening. Maybe they feel bad in their conscience, and they're reporting what is happening. So many times, in the kind of businesses that we've dealt with, they always catch fraud after the fact, and this is where data comes in. I think Soumya put it very clearly that most of our companies here in Kenya don't operate the ERPs to the full extent. So a large percentage don't have ERPs, and even the ones that do, I think only 3.1% are the ones that use it to its full extent. So those are some of the things that companies can do practically, and it doesn't cost very much. We've dealt with some companies where, so for instance, we have an investment cooperative we're working with, where they manage all of their fixed income funds just off of an Excel. Because that's what they used to do before they grew. And in many of these instances, the company has grown and they've maintained the same systems as they had before. So these are some of the things that are very easy and practical to do. You can just simply move that Excel into an ERP, have the right dashboards to tell you the right data. Many times fraud stares us in the face. So you'd have stock variances, for example, overstated receivables, understated payables, things like that stares you in the face. And if you just look at your data and you have certain rules that you put in your data, that give you exceptions and that tell you, when something wrong is happening, just as it starts to happen, before the fraud, becomes massive, then these are things that, don't cost you very much as a company, and you can immediately start getting sense from your data.
And thanks, Roger. Joseph. Internal audit is often seen as merely a compliance checkbox. Yeah, that's the old view, the old world view. So how can SMEs strengthen their audit processes to move from reactive to proactive risk management and fraud prevention, ensuring that governance adds real business value?
Thank you, Zahir, for the question. The hard truth first, internal audit mostly is being activated by pain. A missing check, misstated financial information, but at the time we come to realize it, we have already incurred the loss. So how do we get ahead of it? The first thing is having a live risk registers. Most of organizations that we've worked with, they normally use risk registers as a compliance checkbox. They just do it once a year because the external audit will come and they'll request for the risk registers. The risk registers have to be live because risk is not sleeping. Why should we? Okay. Secondly is the issue of risk-based auditing. Okay. If procurement constitutes 65% of your cash outflows, we need to give it as much resource as possible and not give it an equal share with other low-risk departments. Because at the end of the day, that's where your core business is. That is not negotiable, is an independent internal audit. For SMEs, this service can be outsourced because I know having an internal auditor in-house might be expensive in the long run, but you can outsource this to audit firms. You can do an outsourced internal audit at a quarter price of what you would have paid a full year resource. So, and how you position this is the internal audit. Most organizations will find the internal auditor reporting to the finance manager. Where is the independence when the internal auditor reports to the finance manager? So for us to be proactive and not reactive, we need to have an independent internal audit function that report directly to the audit committee or the board to make sure that the observations are not cascaded down so that to please anyone in the organization. And finally, the risk management needs to be embedded into day-to-day operations. We need to include risk management discussion in the management routines. The internal audit has to provide operational risk, the way the business changes. If there are changes if you're going into new markets, maybe new suppliers, this risk management culture needs to be embedded in daily management routines. Moving from reactive to proactive, it's not about budget. It's less about budget, but more about frequency and leadership buy-in. If the governance sets the tone and the top, then everything cascades down and increases the business value that Somia was talking about.
So Joseph, what's the mind shift or the mindset change that's required in business owners and leaders?
I think the mind shift change, it's leadership.
Leadership,
the leadership needs to set the tone at the top.
Okay, yeah, okay, clear message. Paul, technology underpins every modern business initiative. What are the critical IT and cybersecurity considerations that Kenyan SMEs must address when adopting new tools or systems so they avoid creating fresh risks while enabling growth and cross-border operations?
Thank you, Zahir. So I think the one thing most SMEs want to do is copy what the other competitor is doing. So they have M365 Dynamics, and I see this a lot, thinking that it would be a direct fit for your organization. So the first thing you need to do is assess your needs before you assess the tool. Secondly is purely just a triad. For those who have a place where they can write, just draw a triangle. At the top, write people. On the bottom left, write process. And on the far end, write technology. So get the right people. First things first. Because the wrong people are the ones who will create these breaches for you. Number two, also train your people on cybersecurity and the risk of cybersecurity. Run phishing campaigns if you have to, but ensure that that is done. On the process side, two things. Know your processes, know your data, know where it is actually sitting. Somi has spoken about most people just using Excel. Maybe we have a HR platform, but our payroll platform is not integrated to the HR platform. So how does fraud occur? You just add one more person in the payroll system, but does not exist in the HR system. So then payroll is processed, and you end up paying a ghost employee. On the technology side, and this is the most important thing, is to get the right fit for your organization. So don't just go for the shiny tool. It's online, it's always in your ads, on YouTube, and you're thinking, wow, I really want to get Workpay for my HR system. Because it's always in your face. Do your research, understand the tool, do vendor due diligence, understand the vendor. Can this person support you when you're having a cyber breach? Especially for these cloud systems. So there's a saying that always goes around. The security of the cloud is the cloud provider security or responsibility. But security in the cloud is your responsibility. So AWS, Microsoft, all these big players, they will always secure the primary environment. But within that environment, that is your responsibility. Implement strong controls. Have MFA, multi-factor authentication. Have independent accounts. Don't have that one account that is being logged in by 3 or 4 people, for example, right? So small controls, baby steps for SMEs, and as you grow, you realize that you build a stronger control framework as you continue on. 5 years down the line, you'll really have a strong framework. So start now, start small.
Thanks, Paul. Soumya, it's always ladies first, but superstars last. Many Kenyan SMEs still feel that advanced analytics is only for large organizations, people who've got big budgets. What are the most practical, low-cost entry points that SMEs can use today to start leveraging analytics for digital transformation and immediate business impact?
I'd like to answer this in 2 parts, right? The first part I've already mentioned in the presentation. It's a little of what Roger, Joseph, and Paul had said. Start with what you have. You don't need to invest heavily on tools, right? But then in terms of fraud detection and in terms of making sure that your organization is protected, in that sense, it's more of process reengineering and it's more of thought process change. So it's about asking simple questions. You could have probably your ERP data in an Excel file, right? But something as simple as cross-checking if you have 2 payments made for one inventory, right? That now raises a question. Or maybe reconciling it with your M-Pesa statement and saying that you have a different value in the M-Pesa and you have a different value in your ERP. Why is that? Just these questions then bring in the concept of analytics, and then that's when you want to dig deeper and see, okay, what else can I do? Where is the loophole? What don't I have? What information don't I have? And only then are you able to tell your gaps, are you able to fill your gaps, and you're able to do a full process reengineering and then fall into analytics, right? And I'd also like to say, I don't think so analytics is the end goal. Like, it's not the end of the process. I feel like it should come in the start of the process, especially when you're doing a digitization or process reengineering, because it really brings out the loopholes that you have in your organization. And by saying analytics, I don't say you invest like in a tool like Tableau, buy servers and all of that stuff. No. You can start with maybe just Excel analysis, and then if you feel like, okay, I can take this a step further, you can probably now then invest in a tool. You can reach out to organizations which do analytics or host data for you. There are a lot of options available out in the market, right? And with AI right now as well, there's a lot of visibility that you get with the analytics itself. So, but I feel like it's all a step-to-step process depending on what you're trying to detect and how you're trying to change your organization.
Thanks, Soumya. So what's the one dashboard that every SME should have?
The internal audit dashboard.
Internal audit dashboard,
Yes.
She's selling your services, huh? Joseph?
For sure.
Okay. Roger, back to you. Just going a little bit deeper now. So with cross-border commerce expanding and counterfeit goods becoming a growing challenge in Kenya-European trade, what role does forensic expertise play in protecting intellectual property and also safeguarding the supply chain itself?
Thanks, Zahir. I think the role that forensic expertise plays is the investigative rigor that is needed to uncover some of these things like pattern infringement and substandard goods and so on and so forth. Because what forensic experts do is they test the underlying data, and it all flows back to what Soumya has said. You have data and you're not able to, maybe, for example, it's your supply chain, starts from coming outside of the country into your country of operation, and you don't know what really goes into it. All you're doing is making payments for the expenses. So for instance, we did a case for a company that needed approval for certain levels of purchases for things at the port. But what the employees started doing at the port is they would break down the pallets, that were coming in, into small sizes that needed now that would meet that would fall just below the threshold that was needed for approval. And then over time, they started now skimming off all of those pallets. We had another organization that at the port, things would be changed. So whatever you purchased, in this instance it was China, they would come in, change it to substandard goods, sell it off. It was an electronics company. Then, give it off. And the customers started complaining, and they didn't notice this, until they started looking at, and when they brought some of our teams in to start looking at the data that they have, what we're selling versus what we imported. So these are, very practical things that you can do with the data that you have. And it needs some level of investigative rigor and knowing the kind of rules that you need in place, to catch the fraud. Many times we operate as if our companies are operating, in the terms of best practices. You have the best people, but you always have to imagine the worst. So think of what is the worst thing that would happen to this company. What is the easiest way someone would steal, my products or my revenue, and then once you do that, then you think back and say, then what can I do to prevent that? Yeah.
Okay. So, what industries are most exposed, and are our local SMEs, are they sort of underestimating this risk?
Yes, I think they are underestimating this risk, and we've seen it across all industries. Especially industries that are heavily on the supply chain and on procurement, like Joseph mentioned. So it's a very widespread risk that is severely underestimated in the economy.
Thanks, Roger. Joseph, back to you. So what are the common or most common fraud risks that you can see in Kenya SMEs? From your experience, I know you've got a number of audits that you do, internal audits which are outsourced. And how can stronger internal audit technologies help detect these early and also reduce financial losses?
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I think for the question, I'll borrow heavily from Roger and Soumya. If you look at the context of SMEs, the fraud risk patterns are remarkably the same across all sectors. One of the fraud risks that are in SMEs is around procurement, inflated invoices. So you find some irregularities around the procurement side, and then secondly, payroll. Payroll is one of the major fraud risk. You find maybe ghost workers. You find an employee who left the organization but they're still in the payroll. And all this happened because you might find that the finance manager is the same person who runs the payroll, and he also the same person who approves the payroll. So most of the time, this is not a process gap. I tend to think it's more of an open door. Everyone who wants anything to pick can go in. And then you're looking at risk like the inventory theft and stock manipulation. This happens mostly in the hotel industry. When somebody makes a sale and then they void that sale. Once they receive the cash, they void the sale, like a credit note. So it's in and out. But technically, they have made that sale. And how do they adjust this inside of the inventory? Most SMEs, you'll find the finance manager is the one that runs everything around that inventory system. So they'll just pass a stock adjustment, and then they'll print a general ledger that will be signed. We just take to the MD. MD will just sign. It's just a normal adjustment. But technically, what has happened is they've made the sales, they've received the cash, and they've just adjusted the adjustment. They adjusted the stock. So even if the external audit come, they'll never find any irregularity in that one because there are proper approvals. Then other risk is cash manipulation, and finally, most of the forensic investigations that we have done, the most common risk on SMEs is the expense reimbursement. If you look at most of the NGO sector, especially the grants, the biggest fraud is through the reimbursement of expenses. Most of the times, those expenses are not business expenses, but they go through the business. So then the second question, how do we detect this fraud risk? One of the things I'll say is, borrowing from SOMIA, is data analytics, the basic data analytics. You don't have to have a system. For things like procurement, you can have the three-way matching. Okay, the three-way matching, the invoice, purchase order, and the goods received note. You always found there anomalies lying around there. They're always there. Secondly, what Roger had mentioned in the previous question about whistleblowing platform. Okay, 99.99% of the time, the employees or the staff know who's doing what. So if there's a mechanism people could report fraud anonymously, then that will greatly help in detecting fraud risk. So we can have as simple as an anonymous email that everyone in the organization have access to, and they can send an email from that email anonymously without knowing which one has sent that report. So that can help. And finally, surprise audits. If people know when audits are going to happen, they'll always get ready for the audit. But you can have surprise audits around cash, maybe petty cash. You can have surprise cash counts. You can have surprise inventory counts, things that people rarely know that they happen. And this can be done either internally or from somebody that you have outsourced from external. So those three basic ways are the easiest way to detect frauds in the SME sector. Thanks.
And how often do you think SMEs should be reviewing their controls?
Review of controls, I think, I tend to look at controls more like processes, and review of processes should be as frequent as possible. For the reporting, it can be quarterly. The most basic thing is quarterly. You can do quarterly audits to review processes. And when you review processes, you have to look at it from the perspective of value addition and not compliance. We are not looking if you're complying with the processes. We are looking from a point of how best are we going to add value in these processes. This, because it might be used to doing something the similar way, but maybe there's a way we can make the process more effective. So quarterly is the best frequency to review processes.
Thanks. And I think with M-Pesa and our current banking systems, they're designed in such a way that you do get a full audit trail. So if you get your staff to diligently follow banking systems, the M-Pesa audit trail, the ETM's audit trail, then you've already secured a lot of your business. Paul, so how can IT advisory services help businesses integrate new technologies securely into their systems to support fraud prevention, support regulatory compliance, and also efficient cross-border commerce between Kenya and European partners?
Right. So I think Joseph has also alluded to it. It's surprise audits. So most people say that I've never been hacked. But there are two types of people, those who know they've been hacked and those who do not know. But both of you have been hacked. And in your lifetime, you'll one day be hacked, whether you like it or not. I think it's something that you need to take away and know that you will be hacked at some point. So regular audits help you, IT audits in this perspective, help you, one, benchmark against an international standard. So if we're using ISO 27001, which is now the Information Security Management Systems standard, or even the NIST that is quite common in the EU, as you mentioned, you get to add those controls which are globally accredited into your environment without having to undertake the certification. Again, SMEs may not have the budget to go full-blown on certification. However, you can always benchmark on that. Number two is running vulnerability assessments and penetration tests onto your environment. This is your existing environment, and anytime you make any significant changes to your environment, you've moved from one cloud provider to another, you've moved from one email domain to another, you've changed your website, run vulnerability assessments, especially on these environments, as soon as they are deployed. So that then you can trap that particular bug before everyone else discovers it or uses it. I think he mentioned about the cloud issue, and that's what most organizations miss, is ensuring that the vulnerabilities are known beforehand. Number three is on the regulatory compliance. Know your regulator. Know the environment you're playing in. For Kenya, there's the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. You have to comply to the ODPC. If it's KRA, you need to comply with the KRA. A good example is recently there's been the change of VAT on petrol from 16% to 8%. Have you implemented that in your system? Can your vendor support you if you need that, especially if you're in the fuel business? Can your vendor help you implement that on your ETR, on your tools that you are actually doing the point of sale, the POSs? And again, for cross-border, you need to know what your neighbor has implemented. The GDPR was the first standard. Went across 2016, across very many countries have benchmarked against that. In Africa, we have the 52 countries on the Malabo Convention. Kenya is yet to adopt it, but I'm sure we'll be signing this very soon. And now there's an African framework. There's a difference in the EU framework with the African framework. When you're moving data from Africa to EU and backwards, you have to comply with both regulators, not just on one side. So you need to know your regulator and also abide by the laws and regulations of that particular country.
Thanks, Paul. And perhaps just to sort of wind down with the panelists, my last question to you, Soumya, is what separates SMEs that successfully create value from data from those that remain stuck at simple digitization?
Let me just explain what simple digitization and
yeah, that would be good.
data is, right? So you have three types of companies. The ones that do everything on Excel, or probably just have word sheets that they're maintaining.
Yeah, because we're online as well. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, okay. So I was saying, let me just explain what it means, right? So we have three types of companies. There's one who are maintaining everything on Excel and are maintaining everything on Word and Excel, just the normal Microsoft tools that we have, right? Now, there are the others who are implementing ERP systems, who are probably implementing CRM, maybe an HR tool, maybe a timesheet tool, attendance, all of that, right? But then they're doing nothing beyond that, right? And then there's a third type. Now they're taking the tools that they have, and then they're saying, okay, let me see what's there. Let me see what's happening in my tools. Let me see what's happening in my business. And then they take it a step further and to do analysis. Now, in the first type of companies, what happens is they don't have control over anything that's happening unless something full-blown, like there's a full-blown fraud or something really goes wrong. That's only when they get to know what's happening with the company, and then they'll have to take a reactive measure than a proactive measure then. So the second one too, it's a pretty similar situation, but because you have audit trails in the system, hopefully hoping that the system has been set up well, but because you have audit trails, you can extract data from the system, you can go back to a certain date, they're in a better position than in the first company, definitely. But then again, it doesn't make them proactive, it makes them reactive because they know nothing about the data that they have. And that just makes them a company that's just collecting data but doing nothing about it, right? But we're not talking about the first two type of companies. We're talking about the third company now where they're more reactive. And it starts, again, like I said, it starts with small things. You could also just start with HR data. There was a client of ours who was maintaining everything on Excel. That's HR data. So they had one Excel for all the joiners. They had one Excel for all the leavers. And for some reason, the data was not matching. They were not able to tell when they're joining, when they're leaving. It was just a very complicated situation, right? Even just if it's just analyzing how many people are joining you, how many people are leaving, or something as simple as who are your star performers, right? You can just start there. It doesn't, again, need to be like a full-fledged dashboard again, but then probably just seeing, okay, how are people performing, which manager is losing the most employees, something as simple as that. But it's about asking the right questions at the right time and making sure that you use the data that you have in your organizations. And I think a lot of people are not doing that at the moment.
Thanks, Soumya. We're nearly hitting the hour. So what I want to do is thank the panelists for all of their views. We've heard a lot today. I think the key thing, the key message is there's a lot you can do. Okay, as a small business owner, there's a lot of opportunities. We now have easy routes to digitization, easy routes to track all of the transactions in our business. So I think a couple of questions. So we'll take a couple of questions and then we can close. So one question is from Deepak Davda, and it is, how safe is it to use AI Claude, for example, for advanced analytics and for gaining more insights regarding business decisions? And I'll pass that on to Soumya and also to Paul.
If it's your organization data and you're putting it on Claude, then there's a risk of exposure over there because Claude, again, is hosted on a public server. And remember, whatever you put over there is being used to train the AI itself. So unless you have something that's native to your organization or to your environment, I'd suggest do not embed or do not put in your data out there onto the cloud system. But Paul.
Yeah, just to top that up, agentic AI, if it's embedded in your environment, then it is safe because then it's in a closed loop. However, if you must, because most people really want to embed AI, pseudomize your data, anonymize it, or just delete any personal data. Then post it on the AI tool, run the analytics. It's like running a fake model, and then use the insights that come from the platform to embed back and re-engineer back into your data. But do not share personal data, especially on public AI systems. I think it's to the online users. Yeah.
So how easy is it to do that? Substitute your data with other data. I mean, is there a shortcut that our members can take away?
Right. Yeah. So with dashboards, first, going back to what Soumya said, if you have dashboards, you can leverage on various data sources, right? Pull all that data. Then anonymization. You do that off the platform on Excel. Have an Excel sheet. Send that to Claude. Run the analytics. Send it back. Push it back. It's that simple.
All right, folks. Yeah, he's just given away $10,000 worth of revenue here. Another question from James Mushai. How do we ensure analytics-driven fraud detection is well-governed and trusted by management and employees? And there's a second question. How can insights from analytics be converted into actionable controls and management decisions? So the first question, Roger, to you. Okay, how do we ensure analytics-driven fraud detection is well-governed and trusted by management and employees?
So what I think is, so we have the 3 lines of defense, which we all know about. So you have to set it up in such a way that when you're doing your analytics, you know who you're going to report to. So like Joseph gave an example, maybe a finance manager who is in charge of a whole procurement process. That is someone who can easily take advantage of the process and use it, for his own benefit. So you have to have, very simple segregation of duties so that you ensure that the right level of management has access to the right level of data and the right level of analytics. We're dealing with one case where high-level managers have access to stock tech data, and they can adjust this data to suit their own narrative. So they're making adjustments to stock that are making the company seem like they have less stock, and then they're skimming off the rest. So, very simple. One example in how this is managers who have been given access to higher level of data than they should have. So in this case, like I said, just segregate the duties. Make it such that one person has access to this stock take data, but only another person, someone else has to approve this data, and someone higher than that particular level of management can approve, maybe a stock adjustment, and so on and so forth. So it all comes down to segregation of duties.
Okay, and maybe this question I can put to you, Joseph. You've kind of escaped a little bit. So how can the insights from analytics be converted into actionable controls and management decisions? And Somi, you can also jump in.
Okay, I think I'll start before I let the expert of that. Analytics, especially in business processes, they're there to give you the anomalies. They give you the exceptions. So from the exceptions, you can use those exceptions that you've gotten to now do what we say in internal audit is every process is a risk. Okay? So once you get the exceptions, you do a risk analysis to see how impactful it is to your organization as a whole, and then you come up with mitigations. So you can use the AI analytics to help you come up with mitigations to make sure that you improve your processes, you close your gaps, and you increase your business value.
Okay, thanks. And I think there's one last question that we're going to take, and then we can wind up. And this is from Monica Arita, and this is for you, definitely, Soumya. How can organizations manage the risk of data overload and siloed information by enabling data to work together effectively regardless of where it is stored or managed? And I know this is your area of expertise, so go for it. Maybe you can give the example of what we do.
Yeah, so like I'd mentioned, I always believe that every part of data needs to be native to one system. So when we say anything to do with inventory or stocks or anything, it needs to be native to ERP system itself. So you're having your master data that's stored in the ERP itself. When you say anything to do with customers, any details, their addresses, their finance managers, their point of contacts, everything should be native to CRM. And it's very important to have a unique identifier in each one of the systems that speaks to the other system, where you can have a relationship between two systems, right? In that sense, then you mitigate the risk of now maintaining client data in CRM and then again in the ERP itself. But you just have the unique identifier flowing from your CRM to your ERP system. This talks a lot about your architecture, how you're structuring your systems, and your business processes, right? Because if that's not done well, then you're likely then just replicating everything that you have. And then when you're doing analytics, you'll have different data from different sources, because then you're trying to extract data, but you have duplicates because the same client has a different ID in CRM and the same client has a different ID in ERP. Yeah.
Thanks, Soumya. So, thank you very much. Big thanks to the French Chamber of Commerce, Kenya, for hosting this. Thank you very much. We're very happy that we were able to be part of this. So, thank you very much. Just in closing, I want to say the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners does a survey every year, and they've been doing it for the last 20, 30 years. A global survey, yeah? You can check it out, it's free, you can download it online. It's the ACFE Global Survey. organizations generally lose 5% of bottom line, okay, to fraud. Yeah, and there's a lot that don't survive that loss. We've seen, you know, Roger and I, Joseph, we've investigated a number of SMEs here who've had fraud. And at the end of the investigation, you know, it was so bad that the rug was pulled from underneath, you know, their feet, because, you know, obviously, you know, donors and grants, you know, had obviously not met their conditions and so on and so forth. But it's very sad. So it is a serious risk. That's the point. It's a serious risk. We've seen, you know, NGOs and, you know, other organizations, you know, that have been incorporated for 30, 40 years going down because of this one reason. But now you have an opportunity, you have a blueprint, okay, to follow. So, you know, I'm hoping that you will take the initiative, pick up the phone, call us. You know, we're happy to come and consult with you. Our first consultation, even if it's 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, is free. And you know that, you know, so we're happy to come and meet you, pick our brains, you know, and we will be very happy to hold your hands on this journey going forward. Thank you again, all of you, and I wish you all a very happy day. Bye-bye. Huh? There's one from? Okay. This is an ex-BDO staff out there listening in, you know, and she obviously wants to be part of the action. Meha, how are you, if you're listening? So across the industries, you have worked in manufacturing, retail, and hospitality. Which one sees the highest frequency of internal fraud, and what controls make the biggest difference in that specific industry? Roger?
Sure. I think Joseph mentioned it and you mentioned it as well. One of the ones that I see as the highest with internal fraud is NGOs. They're the ones that will have a large number of you know, internal people, you know, who are trusted with some level of information, and they exploit that, you know, because they are very trusting in their, many times in their sense, followed closely by manufacturing. Manufacturing is also a very big industry. There's a lot of expenses that are going on, a lot of very continuous things that have to happen each and every day. And many times, you know, management will just, you know, leave one area without, you know, focusing too much, and someone will exploit that. So one very key control that I've seen is, like I said, segregation of duties. So making sure that, you know, someone will approve, you know, whatever someone else has done, and it goes, you know, 3, 4 levels up. And then 2, it all comes down to the tone at the top, as has been mentioned by my colleagues. So the organization, the managers and the leaders at the top, you know, have to make sure that they set the right tone, so that the people who are following, you know, make sure that they, you know, abide to that. And the third thing, as Joseph mentioned as well, is, you know, having a reporting platform. So as you said, one of the things that has been mentioned in the SCFE report to the nations is, I think 50% of all fraud is caught by tips. You know, people will always, or most of the time, report fraud when it happens. So this is a very key control that you need to have so that you can be able to receive reports and act on fraud before it gets too much.
Okay, thank you very much. And I am going to call the session to a close now. I can see the questions are coming in, but unfortunately we've run out of time for more questions. You know, we can definitely respond to others, you know, on email and so on and so forth, you know, so after this, which is something we do for all of our trainings. So again, thank you very much to all of you, and I wish all of you a very pleasant day. going forward. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Just to add, if you can just take 2 minutes and scan this and fill in the survey form, please. Thank you.